Before I tell you this story, just understand one thing. I grew up in a house where respect only existed if you could pay for it. My stepmom made sure everyone knew her son was the future of the family, and me? I was just the inconvenient reminder that my dad had a life before her. So when she cut off my allowance, just because I refused to apologize to her spoiled little prince, I felt powerless, embarrassed, and honestly, betrayed by the only family I had left. But here's the part she never expected. The same boy she defended like a precious glass statue would eventually shatter every ounce of pride she forced me to swallow. And years later, when their perfect world started collapsing, they showed up at my door, looking for help they couldn't buy, borrow, or bully their way into. And in that moment, I realized revenge doesn't always come with fury. Sometimes, it comes politely dressed as success, waiting for them to kneel. Hey, beautiful souls. Wherever you are in the world right now, welcome. I hope you're doing well, I hope your heart is at peace, and I hope you're ready for a story that's going to hit differently. Whether you're watching from your cozy bedroom, on your commute, or just trying to escape for a little while, I'm so glad you're here. And listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are we doing? Go ahead and tap that button. This channel is built on stories that matter, stories that make you feel something real. Don't just watch, be part of this family. I'll wait.
Done? Good.
Now, let's get into it. Ethan Malone had learned early in life that silence could be louder than screaming. He stood in the hallway outside the dining room, his back pressed against the cool wall, listening to his stepmother's voice rise and fall like a conductor leading an orchestra of condemnation. Each word was carefully chosen, each pause deliberate. Victoria had always been good at that, turning conversations into performances where she played both judge and jury. Inside, the family dinner continued without him. Ethan could hear the clink of silverware against fine china, the low rumble of his father's occasional grunt of agreement, and worst of all, the smug, satisfied chuckle of his stepbrother, Preston. That laugh had become the soundtrack to Ethan's humiliation over the past 3 days, ever since the incident at his father's company anniversary party. The party had been held at the Riverside Country Club, one of those places where everything gleamed too brightly and everyone smiled too widely. Ethan had worn the suit his father bought him, stood where he was supposed to stand, and shook hands with people whose names he'd forget by morning. He'd been doing fine, staying invisible, which was usually his goal at family events. Then Preston had decided to make him visible. It started small. A comment about Ethan's haircut within earshot of some of his father's business partners. Then a casual mention that Ethan had barely passed his math class last semester, loud enough for the superintendent of their school district to hear. Each little dig was delivered with that trademark Preston smile, the one that made adults think he was charming and perceptive rather than cruel and calculating. Ethan had absorbed it all, the way he'd learned to absorb most things in the 5 years since his father remarried. He nodded, smiled tightly, and tried to fade back into the wallpaper of his own life. But then Preston had gone too far. They'd been near the dessert table when Preston, emboldened by the attention of a small crowd, had decided to share a story. He'd laughed as he told everyone about how Ethan had cried in the car after their parents' wedding, how he'd begged his father not to marry Victoria, how pathetic he'd looked with tears streaming down his 12-year-old face. The crowd had gone quiet. Some looked uncomfortable. Others had tried to laugh it off as brotherly teasing. Ethan's father had been across the room, deep in conversation with a potential investor. And Victoria had been standing right there, close enough to intervene, to tell her son that some things weren't meant to be shared, that some pain wasn't entertainment. Instead, she'd smiled. That same indulgent, isn't he clever smile she always gave Preston when he pushed boundaries. Something inside Ethan had snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, definitive break, like a guitar string pulled too tight. He'd looked at Preston and said, clearly and calmly, that he was a spoiled, insecure bully who hid behind his mother's skirts because he had nothing real to offer the world. The small crowd had gasped. Someone had actually gasped like they were in a soap opera. Preston's face had gone red, then pale, then red again. And Victoria had moved with the speed of a mother bear protecting her cub. Now, 3 days later, Ethan was still paying for those words. The dining room door swung open, and his father appeared in the hallway. Robert Malone looked tired, the kind of tired that came from years of choosing the path of least resistance. He was a tall man, once strong, now softened by too many business lunches and too little backbone. Do you know that you can save a soul right now by subscribing? It's free. It takes 2 seconds, and it means I get to keep sharing these stories with you. Don't scroll past this. Be part of something good today. His eyes met Ethan's for a brief moment before sliding away, focusing on a point just past his son's shoulder. That was how Robert communicated these days. In glances that didn't quite land, in words that didn't quite say anything. "You need to apologize," Robert said, his voice low. His eyes were still focused on that spot past Ethan's shoulder, as if looking directly at his son might require him to actually see what was happening. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. For what? Robert sighed, the sound of a man who'd already surrendered before the battle began. You know what for? You embarrassed Preston in front of important people. You embarrassed Victoria. You made a scene. He made a scene first, Ethan said, hating how young his voice sounded, how desperate. He's been making scenes at my expense for years, and nobody says anything. That's different.
How?
Robert finally looked at him then, really looked at him, and Ethan saw something that hurt worse than any of Preston's insults. He saw apathy. His father simply didn't care enough to fight this battle. Because he's younger, Robert said finally, and even he didn't sound convinced by his own reasoning. Because Victoria is my wife, and Preston is her son, and we're trying to be a family here. You're the oldest. You should know better. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. So, I should know better than to defend myself? You should know better than to cause problems. And there it was. The truth that had been hovering unspoken in their house for 5 years. Ethan was the problem. Not Preston's cruelty, not Victoria's favoritism, not Robert's cowardice. Just Ethan, existing, taking up space in a family that had reorganized itself around his absence. Victoria appeared behind Robert, her presence filling the hallway like expensive perfume. She was beautiful in that carefully maintained way, all sharp edges and perfect angles. Everything about her was controlled, from her highlighted hair to her neutral expression. Has he apologized yet? She asked Robert, as if Ethan wasn't standing right there. Not yet, Robert said. Then the consequences continue, Victoria said simply. She turned her gaze to Ethan, and he saw no warmth there, no maternal instinct, nothing but cold calculation. Until you apologize to Preston for your behavior, for humiliating him at your father's event, you won't receive your allowance. You're 17, Ethan. Old enough to understand that actions have consequences. Ethan wanted to laugh. Actions have consequences. What about Preston's actions? What about the consequences of 5 years of systematic belittlement? What about the consequence of his father choosing a new family over his first son? But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he asked, "And if I don't apologize?" Victoria's smile was thin, victorious. "Then you'll learn to manage without. Consider it a life lesson in humility." She turned and walked back into the dining room. Through the open door, Ethan could see Preston sitting at the table, playing with his phone, completely unbothered by the drama he'd caused. He looked up, caught Ethan's eye, and smirked. That smirk would haunt Ethan's memory for years. Robert lingered for a moment longer. "Son," he started, and then stopped. He had nothing to say. Nothing that would help anyway. He squeezed Ethan's shoulder once, a gesture that felt like a consolation prize, and followed his wife back to dinner. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long time after the door closed. He thought about marching in there and apologizing just to end this. He thought about the money in his account, the $73.42 that would have to last until he figured out what to do next. He thought about his friends making plans for the weekend that he wouldn't be able to join. He thought about the school trip to Washington, D.C. next month that required a $200 deposit. He thought about his mother, who died when he was 11, who'd made his father promise to always take care of him, to always put him first. That promise had lasted until Victoria Bennett walked into their lives. Ethan pushed off the wall and walked his room. It was at the end of the hall, smaller than Preston's, decorated with nothing but functional furniture, because Victoria had redecorated the house shortly after moving in, and somehow his room had been last priority, always about to be updated but never quite getting there. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. In that moment, Ethan Malone made a decision that would change the trajectory of his entire life. He would not apologize. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And if that meant war with Victoria and Preston, if it meant living without money, without support, without the illusion of family, then so be it. He would survive this. He would survive them. And someday, when he'd built something real, something that belonged to him and only him, they would understand exactly what they'd thrown away. The humiliation was just beginning, but so was something else. Something harder, sharper, and infinitely more patient. The first week without money was uncomfortable but manageable. Ethan had always been careful with spending, a habit formed from years of watching his father obsess over budgets and investments. He had protein bars stashed in his desk drawer, a half-full transit card, and enough school supplies to last the semester. He told himself he could ride this out, that Victoria would eventually get bored of the punishment and move on to some other method of asserting control. He was wrong. Victoria didn't get bored. She got creative. It started with small things. The Wi-Fi password mysteriously changed, and when Ethan asked for the new one, Victoria smiled sweetly and said that internet access was a privilege, not a right. If he wanted privileges, he knew what he needed to do. Then the pantry started disappearing. Not literally, but practically. Victoria began buying foods that required preparation, things that couldn't just be grabbed for a quick meal. The easy snacks, the microwavable dinners, the sandwich supplies, all of it vanished. In their place appeared ingredients: raw chicken, vegetables that needed chopping, pasta that needed sauce made from scratch. When Ethan tried to cook one evening, Preston wandered into the kitchen and made a show of calling their mother to report that Ethan was wasting their groceries. Victoria had appeared within minutes. "Those ingredients are for family meals," she'd said. "If you want to eat what I cook, join us at dinner. Otherwise, you'll need to buy your own food." "But you cut off my allowance," Ethan had said, confused by the circular logic. "Exactly," Victoria had replied. "So, I suppose you know what you need to do. Before we go any further, can I ask something? Are you subscribed yet? If you're feeling this story, if you're invested in what happens to Ethan, go ahead and hit that button. It's how I know you're with me, how I know these stories matter to you." The second week, his father got involved. Robert called Ethan into his home office, a dark wood-paneled room that smelled like leather and old books, the kind of room that was supposed to communicate success, but mostly just felt suffocating. He was sitting behind his massive desk, looking at something on his computer screen, and didn't look up when Ethan entered. "Close the door," Robert said. Ethan did. "Your mother says you're still refusing to apologize." "She's not my mother," Ethan said quietly. Robert's fingers stilled on the keyboard. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to swallow.
"Fine. Victoria."
"Your stepmother. Whatever you want to call her, she's my wife, and she's concerned about your attitude." "My attitude," Ethan repeated. "Yes. This stubbornness, this pride. It's not serving you well." Robert finally looked up, and Ethan saw something that might have been concern if it weren't buried under layers of inconvenience. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, son. Just apologize to Preston. Say you're sorry for embarrassing him. Mean it or don't mean it. I frankly don't care anymore, but say the words so we can move past this." "And then what?" Ethan asked. "Then everything goes back to normal? Preston keeps treating me like garbage. Victoria keeps acting like I'm some stain on her perfect family, and you keep pretending not to notice?" Robert's expression hardened. "You know, your mother wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you causing division in this family." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His mother. The woman who'd spent her last months making Robert promise, over and over, that he'd protect their son, that he'd never let anyone make Ethan feel less than loved. And here was Robert, invoking her memory to guilt Ethan into submission. "Don't," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "Don't you dare use her to justify this." "I'm trying to keep this family together," Robert said, his voice rising. "Do you think it's easy? Do you think I don't have enough stress with work, with bills, with trying to make everyone happy? I'm not asking you to make me happy, Ethan said. I'm asking you to see what's happening. I'm asking you to care that your son is being treated like he doesn't belong in his own home. Robert stood up, his chair rolling back with force. You belong here. You're just making it impossible for anyone to live with you. Now stop being selfish. Stop making everything about you, and apologize to your brother. He's not my brother. He's as close to a brother as you're going to get, so you'd better figure out how to make peace with that. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Ethan realized in that moment that his father wasn't going to save him. Not now, not ever. Robert had made his choice years ago when he said I do to Victoria, and everything since then had just been elaborate justification for abandoning his first family in favor of a second. Fine, Ethan said quietly. I'll figure it out. Good, Robert said, relief flooding his features. Thank you. I'll let Victoria know you're ready to apologize.
I didn't say that.
Robert's relief curdled into frustration. Then what did you mean? I meant I'll figure out how to take care of myself. Since that's clearly what I need to do. Ethan left before his father could respond. The third week, the pressure intensified. Teachers started asking why Ethan hadn't paid his lab fees. The school trip deposit deadline passed without payment. His friends invited him to the movies, to dinner, to the new arcade downtown, and Ethan made excuses until they stopped inviting him altogether. He started staying late at the library, partly because it was warm and had Wi-Fi, partly because going home felt like walking into enemy territory. One evening, he returned to find Preston in his room. His stepbrother was sitting on his bed, scrolling through Ethan's notebook, the one where he kept college information, scholarship applications, plans for the future.
Get out, Ethan said.
Preston looked up, that same infuriating smirk on his face. Just wanted to see what was so important that you'd choose it over family. He held up the notebook. College plans? Scholarships? You actually think you're getting out of here? Give that back. Preston stood, holding the notebook just out of reach. Mom says you're being stubborn. She says you're punishing yourself for no reason. He tilted his head, studying Ethan like he was a particularly interesting insect. I think you're just stupid. All you have to do is say you're sorry. 2 words.
I'm sorry.
But your ego won't let you, will it? It's not about ego, Ethan said. Then what's it about? Principles. Something you wouldn't understand. Preston laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Principles don't pay for college, Ethan. Pride doesn't put food in your stomach. You think you're taking some noble stand, but really you're just making yourself miserable. And for what? Because I told a funny story at a party? You humiliated me, Ethan said. On purpose. In front of everyone. And your mother let you.
So?
Preston shrugged. You're too sensitive. You always have been. Maybe if you learned to take a joke, we wouldn't have these problems. And there it was. The fundamental disconnect. To Preston, cruelty was humor. To Victoria, control was love. To Robert, peace was more important than justice. They would never understand why Ethan couldn't just apologize, because they'd never had to sacrifice their dignity to survive. Get out of my room, Ethan said again. Or what? You'll tell Dad? He's on our side, in case you haven't noticed. Preston tossed the notebook onto the bed. You know what your problem is? You think being miserable makes you special. You think suffering makes you noble. But it just makes you pathetic. He walked to the door, then paused. Mom's giving you until the end of the month. After that, she's going to start charging you rent if you won't contribute to the family. Just thought you should know. Preston left, closing the door with exaggerated gentleness. Ethan picked up his notebook. Some of the pages were crumpled, bent, where Preston had been careless. He smoothed them out carefully, methodically, focusing on this small task because it was something he could control. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. Let's talk tomorrow. Please reconsider. Ethan deleted the message. The 4th week, Victoria called a family meeting. They gathered in the living room, the 4 of them, positioned like opposing teams. Victoria and Preston on one couch, Robert in his chair, Ethan standing because sitting felt too much like surrendering ground. Before we continue, quick question. Are you subscribed? If not, go ahead and fix that for me. I promise, I'll keep the stories coming. Don't leave me hanging. This has gone on long enough, Victoria announced. She was wearing white, which seemed intentional, like she was trying to look angelic. Ethan, you've had a month to think about your behavior. Surely you've realized by now that your pride is only hurting you. Ethan said nothing. Your father and I have discussed this extensively, Victoria continued. We've tried to be understanding. We've given you space to come to the right conclusion on your own. But your stubbornness is affecting the entire household. Preston feels unsafe in his own home. Preston, who had been looking bored, suddenly arranged his features into something approximating fear. He told me yesterday he's afraid you might hurt him, Victoria said. That you have so much anger, so much resentment, that he doesn't know what you're capable of. It was such an absurd lie that Ethan almost laughed. But then he saw his father's face, saw the way Robert was looking at him with something like suspicion, and he realized they were serious. They were actually trying to paint him as dangerous. I've never touched him, Ethan said carefully. I've never threatened him. Not physically, Victoria said. But emotional abuse is still abuse, Ethan. The way you ice him out, the way you make him feel unwelcome in his own home, the way you poison the atmosphere with your resentment. It's a form of violence. Ethan stared at her, genuinely amazed.
She was really doing this.
She was really trying to rewrite history so completely that his self-defense became aggression, his boundaries became abuse. I want you to apologize, Victoria said.
Right now.
In front of all of us. I want you to tell Preston that you're sorry for your behavior, that you're sorry for making him feel unsafe, and that you're committed to being a better brother going forward. And if I don't, Victoria's smile was cold. Then you can pack your things and leave.
Tonight.
The room went silent. Robert shifted in his chair. Victoria, he started, but she held up one hand.
No.
We've coddled him long enough. He's 17, almost an adult. If he wants to act like he doesn't need this family, then he can prove it. She looked at Ethan. So, what's it going to be? An apology or the door? Ethan looked at Preston, who was watching him with barely contained glee. He looked at his father, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He looked at Victoria, who'd backed him into this corner with surgical precision. He thought about apologizing. The words were right there, simple, easy.
I'm sorry.
He could say them, mean nothing, and buy himself time until he turned 18, until he could leave on his own terms. But he also knew that if he apologized now, it wouldn't end here. Victoria would see his surrender as proof that her methods worked. She'd use this tactic again and again, escalating each time, until there was nothing left of who he was. He looked at Victoria and said, I'm not apologizing. Then pack your bags, she said simply. Victoria, Robert said, standing up. This is extreme. He's still in high school. And he's making a choice, Victoria said. I'm simply respecting that choice. If Ethan wants to be independent, to reject our support and our family, then he should have the opportunity to live independently. Where's he supposed to go? That's his problem to solve. She turned back to Ethan. You have 2 hours. Ethan nodded once, then turned and walked upstairs. Behind him, he heard his father say something in a low voice, heard Victoria's sharp response, heard Preston's laugh quickly stifled. None of it mattered anymore. In his room, Ethan pulled out the duffel bag he'd used for overnight trips back when he had friends to visit. He started packing mechanically, clothes, toiletries, his notebooks, the few things that mattered.
His phone rang.
His father. Ethan declined the call. It rang again immediately. This time he answered. Son, Robert said, and his voice was thick with something that might have been regret if it had arrived about 5 years earlier. You don't have to do this. Just apologize. Just say the words. I can't, Ethan said. Why not? What's so important that you'd choose it over having a home? My dignity, Ethan said.
It's all I have left.
Robert was quiet for a long moment. Your mother would want you to be practical. My mother would want you to be a father, Ethan said, and hung up. He finished packing. 1 bag. That's all his life amounted to. 1 bag of essentials and a heart full of determination. When he came downstairs, Victoria was waiting by the door. She'd put on lipstick, he noticed. like this was a social occasion. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked, and she almost sounded concerned. Ethan didn't answer. "Because if you need a recommendation for shelter, I can provide one. There are resources for teens in crisis." "I'm not in crisis," Ethan said. "I'm making a choice." "Good," Victoria said. "Then I hope you learn from it." He walked past her, out the door, into the cool evening air. Behind him, he heard the door close with a soft, final click. Ethan stood on the sidewalk in front of the house where he'd lived since he was born, the house his mother had filled with love and laughter, the house that Victoria had methodically transformed into something unrecognizable. He had $73.42 in his bank account, one bag of belongings, and no plan whatsoever. But he also had something Victoria couldn't take from him. He had himself. Whole, unbroken, and finally free. Ethan Malone started walking. He didn't look back. The first night, Ethan slept at the bus station. It wasn't as bad as he'd feared. The fluorescent lights stayed on all night, which made it hard to really sleep, but there were enough travelers coming and going that no one paid attention to one teenager with a duffel bag. He'd bought a sandwich and a bottle of water from a vending machine, carefully counting out the dollars and quarters, watching his small fortune dwindle with each purchase. By morning, he had $67.82 left. He used the public restroom to wash his face, brush his teeth, and change into clean clothes. In the mirror, he looked older somehow. Tired, but also more alert, like something had sharpened overnight. He went to school. It was a Wednesday, which meant he had calculus first period, then chemistry, then English. Normal classes for a very abnormal day. He walked through the halls with his duffel bag and people stared, but no one asked questions. That was the thing about high school. Everyone was too wrapped up in their own drama to really notice someone else's crisis. In calculus, his teacher, Mr. Harrison, stopped him after class. "Everything okay, Ethan?" "Fine," Ethan said. "You just seem," Mr. Harrison paused, searching for the right word, distracted. "Just tired." Mr. Harrison studied him for a moment, and Ethan could see him weighing whether to push further. Finally, he said, "Well, if you need anything, my office hours are posted." "Thank you," Ethan said, and left before the concern in his teacher's eyes could crack something inside him. At lunch, he sat in the library instead of the cafeteria. He couldn't afford to buy food, and he couldn't stomach the idea of sitting with his former friends, explaining why he looked like he'd slept in his clothes. He used the library computer to search for jobs. Most places wanted you to be 18. A few would hire at 17 with parental permission. Ethan didn't laugh at that, but it was close. He applied to 6 places, 2 coffee shops, a grocery store, a bookstore, a movie theater, and a fast food restaurant. He lied on every application, checking the box that said he was 18, hoping no one would verify. After school, he walked to the public library, the big one downtown, the one with study rooms and outlets and bathrooms that locked. He claimed a study room on the 3rd floor, one in the back corner where not many people wandered. This became his routine. School during the day, where he pretended everything was normal. Library in the evening, where he did homework and filled out more job applications. Bus station at night, where he grabbed a few hours of sleep before starting over. His money disappeared faster than he'd anticipated. Food was expensive. Soap, toothpaste, deodorant, all the little things he'd taken for granted, they added up. By the end of the first week, he was down to $32. The grocery store called him back. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Rita, barely glanced at his application before asking when he could start. "Tomorrow?" Ethan suggested. "Tonight," Rita countered. "We need someone for the overnight stock shift. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Minimum wage, paid weekly."
You in?
Ethan calculated quickly. Overnight meant he wouldn't need the bus station anymore. He could sleep during his free periods at school, power through his classes, work at night. It wasn't sustainable long-term, but long-term wasn't the priority. Survival was. "I'm in," he said.
Good.
"Be here at 9:30 for orientation. Settle in, get comfortable, and if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. You're safe here. I promise this story gets better, but we've got to walk through the valley first." That night, Ethan learned what real exhaustion felt like. The work wasn't complicated, but it was relentless. Boxes of inventory arrived on pallets, and his job was to unpack them, check the items against a manifest, price them with a label gun, and stock them on shelves. For 8 hours straight, with two 15-minute breaks and a half-hour lunch. His back ached. His arms ached. His hands, soft from years of writing papers and playing video games, blistered and bled. But he had money coming. $116 for that first week, after taxes. It felt like a fortune. He kept going to school, though it got harder every day. He'd sleep through his morning classes, jolt awake during lunch, sleepwalk through the afternoon. His grades, which had always been solid, as in BS, started slipping. Teachers who'd never noticed him before suddenly had concerns. One afternoon, his guidance counselor, Mrs. Park, called him into her office. "Ethan," she said gently, closing the door behind him. "I'm worried about you." "I'm fine," Ethan said automatically. "You've fallen asleep in 3 classes this week. Your chemistry teacher says you missed a major lab. Your English essay was 2 days late." She leaned forward, her expression kind but firm. "That's not like you. What's going on?" "Just working a lot," Ethan said. "Part-time job." "That's responsible," Mrs. Park said. "But not if it's affecting your education. Have you talked to your parents about cutting back your hours?" Ethan felt something bitter rise in his throat. "My parents are fine with my schedule." It was technically true. They had no idea what his schedule was, which meant they weren't objecting to it. Mrs. Park didn't look convinced. "I'd like to call them just to touch base. Make sure everyone's on the same page about your workload." "That's not necessary," Ethan said quickly. "Really? I'll manage my time better. I'll catch up on the missing work." "Ethan, if something's wrong at home, if you need help, there are resources. People who can." "I'm fine," Ethan said, standing up. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm handling it." He left before she could push further. That night at work, Rita approached him during his break. "You look like hell," she said, not unkindly. "Rough week," Ethan said. "You sleeping?" "When I can." Rita studied him for a long moment. "Where's home for you?" Ethan hesitated.
Why?
"Because you've got that look. The look kids get when home isn't home anymore." She crossed her arms. "I'm not trying to get in your business, but I've been doing this long enough to spot trouble. You running from something or running to something?" "Both," Ethan said finally.
Rita nodded slowly.
"I've got a storage room in the back. Nothing fancy, but it's got a cot and a space heater. You can crash there between shifts if you need to. Won't charge you rent, but I'll need you to pick up extra shifts when we're short-staffed." Ethan stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because 20 years ago I was sleeping in my car and working 3 jobs," Rita said. "Someone gave me a break. I'm paying it forward." She pulled out a key from her pocket. "Don't make me regret it." Ethan took the key. His hand was shaking. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't screw it up." The storage room was exactly what Rita had promised. Nothing fancy. A cot with thin blankets, a space heater that rattled when it ran, walls lined with boxes of overstock inventory. But it was warm. It was private. It was shelter. Ethan slept there that night and woke up crying, though he couldn't have said why. 2 weeks into his new life, he saw Preston. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ethan had just finished a rare day shift and was walking to the library when he spotted his stepbrother coming out of the mall, surrounded by friends, laughing about something on his phone. Preston was wearing new shoes. Expensive ones. The kind Ethan used to covet back when he cared about things like shoes. For a moment, their eyes met across the parking lot. Preston's expression shifted through surprise, smugness, and finally something that might have been guilt if it had lasted longer than a second. Then he turned away, said something to his friends, and they all laughed. Ethan kept walking. That night, lying on his cot in the storage room, he let himself imagine walking up to Preston, letting him see exactly what his mother's little power play had cost. He imagined Preston feeling guilty, telling Victoria what he'd seen, imagine them showing up to rescue him with apologies and promises to do better. But he knew it wouldn't happen. People like Victoria didn't apologize. They doubled down. They justified. They rewrote history until they were always the victims, always the ones who'd been wronged. And Preston? Preston was learning from the master. 3 weeks in, Ethan collapsed during chemistry lab. One moment, he was standing at his station, trying to focus on the titration experiment. The next, the room was spinning, and the floor was rushing up to meet him. He woke up in the nurse's office, with Mrs. Park sitting beside him and a very concerned school nurse taking his blood pressure. "When's the last time you ate?"
the nurse asked.
Ethan tried to remember. Yesterday? Maybe the day before? Time had started blurring together. He's severely dehydrated, the nurse told Mrs. Park. Possibly malnourished. I'm recommending he go to the hospital. No, Ethan said, sitting up too fast. The room spun again. No hospital.
I'm fine.
You're not fine, Mrs. Park said. Ethan, I need you to be honest with me. What's really going on? And maybe it was the exhaustion or the hunger or the loneliness, but Ethan found himself talking. Not about everything, not about the details, but enough. About working overnight shifts. About sleeping in a storage room. About choosing between food and saving money for a deposit on a real room. Mrs. Park listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to make some calls, she said finally. No, Ethan said. Please. If you call CPS, they'll send me back there or to a foster home or... I'm not calling CPS, Mrs. Park said. I'm calling some people I know. People who help kids in situations like yours. She squeezed his hand. You don't have to do this alone, Ethan. 3 days later, Ethan moved into a transitional youth housing facility. It was a narrow 3-story building on the edge of downtown, funded by a nonprofit that specialized in helping teens experiencing homelessness. He had his own small room, shared a bathroom with 3 other guys, and ate meals in a communal kitchen. The rules were strict. Curfew at 10 p.m., mandatory weekly check-ins with a social worker, proof of employment or school enrollment, 0 tolerance for drugs or violence. But it was stable. It was safe. And for the first time in a month, Ethan could breathe. His roommate was a 19-year-old named Carlos who'd aged out of foster care and was working as a mechanic while taking community college classes at night. He taught Ethan how to make cheap meals stretch, how to find free resources around the city, how to survive without sacrificing yourself in the process. You're smart, Carlos told him one night as they made ramen in the communal kitchen. Like actually smart. Don't waste it being angry. Use it to get out. How'd you do it? Ethan asked. How'd you stop being angry? Carlos laughed. Who says I stopped? I'm furious every damn day. But I'm also patient. Anger's fuel, man. You just have to learn to burn it slow. Ethan went back to school with something he hadn't had in months. Focus. He caught up on his missing assignments. He stayed awake in class. He stopped seeing school as something to endure and started seeing it as what it actually was. His way out. He researched scholarships obsessively. Full rides, partial rides, anything that would pay for college. He rewrote his essays a dozen times, making sure every word counted. He studied for the SATs like his life depended on it because it did. And slowly, impossibly, his grades climbed back up. Teachers noticed. Mr. Harrison wrote him a recommendation letter. Mrs. Park helped him navigate the FAFSA, carefully checking the box for unaccompanied youth. The school waived his fees for college applications. People were helping him. Not because he'd apologized, not because he'd surrendered, but because he'd refused to break. For months after Victoria had kicked him out, Ethan walked past his old house. He wasn't planning to. He'd been taking a new route to work and hadn't realized where he was until he turned the corner, and there it was. Same brick facade. Same manicured lawn. Same sense of suffocation wrapped in suburban normalcy. Preston's car was in the driveway. His father's too. The lights were on in the living room, and through the window, Ethan could see movement. A family gathered together, playing out the fiction of happiness. He wondered if they ever thought about him. If his father lay awake at night, wondering if he'd made the right choice. If Preston ever felt the weight of what he'd done. If Victoria ever doubted her methods. Probably not. People like that didn't doubt. They didn't reflect. They just moved forward, confident in their righteousness. Ethan kept walking. He didn't feel sad anymore. He didn't feel angry. He felt free. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. Ethan was in the communal kitchen of the transitional housing facility, making coffee before his shift at the grocery store, when Carlos handed him the envelope. It was thick, the kind of thick that meant something good, and it bore the seal of Northeastern State University. You going to open it or just stare at it?
Carlos asked.
Ethan's hands were shaking. He'd applied to 12 schools, all of them offering strong programs in computer science, all of them with generous financial aid packages for students in his situation. Northeastern had been his top choice, but also the most competitive. He tore open the envelope. Dear Ethan Malone, we are pleased to inform you.
He didn't read the rest. He didn't need to.
I got in, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. Carlos hooped, grabbed him in a hug that lifted him off the ground. That's my boy. What did I tell you? What did I tell you about being patient? Other residents appeared, drawn by the noise. Someone started clapping. Someone else demanded to see the letter. Within minutes, the kitchen was full of people celebrating a victory that belonged to all of them, because everyone in that building understood what it meant to fight for a future that seemed impossible. Rita gave him a cake during his shift that night. It was from the bakery section, slightly smashed from being stored in the break room, with congratulations spelled wrong in blue frosting. It was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. You earned this, Rita said. Every bit of it. Ethan read the full letter during his break. Full academic scholarship. Housing included. Meal plan. Even a stipend for books and supplies. They'd seen his grades, his essays, his recommendation letters, and they decided he was worth investing in. Someone had looked at his life and seen potential instead of problems. He called Mrs. Park the next morning. I heard, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The school counselors have a network. Good news travels fast. Thank you, Ethan said. For everything. For seeing me when I was trying to be invisible. You were never invisible, Ethan. You were just drowning. I'm glad you learned to swim. That weekend, Ethan did something he hadn't done in months. He went to visit his mother's grave. It was in a cemetery on the north side of town, a peaceful place with old trees and winding paths. He hadn't been there since the month after she died, when the grief was still fresh enough to be paralyzing. Her headstone was simple. Elizabeth Malone, beloved mother and wife. The dates of her too short life. Ethan sat on the grass beside her grave and told her everything. About Victoria and Preston. About being kicked out. About sleeping in a bus station and bleeding through his first work shift. About the scholarship and the future that was finally, impossibly, within reach. I did it, he said finally. I survived it. And I didn't apologize. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere nearby, a bird sang. Ethan didn't believe in signs or messages from beyond. But he believed his mother would be proud. Not because he'd been strong, she'd never cared about strength, but because he'd been true to himself. That was what she'd always valued most. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, don't break my heart like that. Tap the button. Let's keep growing together. You're part of this journey now. 2 weeks before graduation, his father called. Ethan stared at his phone, watching the name, Dad, flash on the screen. He hadn't changed it to Robert, hadn't deleted the contact. Some small part of him had still hoped, despite everything, that his father would remember how to be a father. He answered. Ethan, Robert said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. God, I've been trying to reach you for months. Why didn't you tell us where you were? You kicked me out, Ethan said flatly. That's not. Victoria was upset and things got heated, but we never meant for you to actually leave. We thought you'd cool down and come back. Ethan laughed, the sound bitter. You gave me 2 hours to pack. Robert was quiet for a moment. I know things got out of hand, but you're still my son. You're still family. Your graduation is coming up, and I'd like to be there. We'd like to be there. We? Your family. Victoria, Preston, and me. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. After 8 months of silence, after abandoning him to figure out survival on his own, they wanted to show up to his graduation and play happy family?
Why?
Ethan asked. Because we care about you. Because despite everything, we're still your family. No, Ethan said. I mean, why now?
Why call now, after all this time?
Robert hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ethan heard the truth before the words came. Preston mentioned he saw you a while back. Looking a bit rough. We were worried. So you weren't worried enough to look for me when I first left. You weren't worried enough to check if I was safe or fed or alive. But Preston saw me looking homeless, and that embarrassed you, so now you're worried. That's not fair, Robert said. Isn't it? Robert's voice hardened. I'm trying here, Ethan. I'm trying to reach out, to mend bridges. The least you can do is meet me halfway. I did meet you halfway, Ethan said. For 5 years. I met you halfway every time Victoria chose Preston over me. Every time you stayed silent when I was being treated like garbage in my own home. Every time you asked me to be the bigger person. He paused. And then you kicked me out because I wouldn't apologize for defending myself. So forgive me if I don't see this phone call as you trying. I see it as you managing your image. Robert was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Can I at least take you to dinner? Just the two of us. Let me see that you're okay. I am okay, Ethan said. Better than okay, actually. I got into Northeastern. Full scholarship. That's wonderful, Robert said, and he sounded genuinely pleased.
See?
This is good news we should celebrate together. We should have celebrated a lot of things together, Ethan said. But you chose Victoria's happiness over mine. Every time. So now I'm choosing mine. Don't shut me out, Robert said, and now there was desperation in his voice.
Please.
Let me make this right. You can't, Ethan said simply. Some things, once broken, don't go back together. He hung up before his father could respond. Graduation day was sunny, the kind of perfect weather that felt designed for ceremonies and photographs and new beginnings. Ethan walked across the stage in a rented cap and gown, shook hands with the principal, received his diploma to scattered applause. In the audience, he spotted Mrs. Park, Rita, Carlos, and a handful of other people from the transitional housing facility.
His real family.
The one he'd built from scratch. He didn't look for his father in the crowd. He didn't wonder if Victoria and Preston had come after all. He simply moved forward. After the ceremony, Rita took him and Carlos out for burgers at a diner downtown. They sat in a booth by the window, and Rita raised her coffee cup in a toast.
To Ethan, she said.
Who taught us all what resilience really looks like. They clinked cups, and Ethan felt something warm bloom in his chest. Not happiness, exactly. Something steadier. Something earned. What are you going to do now? Carlos asked. Before college starts, work, Ethan said. Save money. Maybe take a week to not do anything at all. Carlos laughed. Look at you, planning rest. Character development. That night, back in his small room at the facility, Ethan lay on his bed and thought about the past year. He thought about the scared kid who'd walked out of his father's house with one bag and no plan. He thought about sleeping in bus stations and bleeding through work gloves. He thought about collapsing in chemistry lab and waking up in the nurse's office. He thought about every moment he'd wanted to give up, to call his father and apologize just to make the struggle stop. And he thought about how glad he was that he hadn't. Because the truth was, Victoria had actually done him a favor. She'd torn away the illusion that family was something you were born into, something guaranteed. She'd forced him to realize that love without respect wasn't love at all. She'd pushed him into the fire, expecting him to burn. Instead, he'd been forged. Ethan pulled out his notebook, the one he'd kept since the beginning, and wrote a single sentence on a fresh page. The best revenge is becoming someone they can never touch again. He closed the notebook and turned off the light. Tomorrow, he'd start packing for college. Tomorrow, he'd begin the next chapter of a life he'd built entirely on his own terms. But tonight, he let himself rest. He'd earned it. Northeastern State University rose up from the city like a promise, made solid. Ethan arrived on a humid August morning, his belongings still fitting into that same duffel bag plus one additional backpack he'd bought from a thrift store. Carlos had driven him, refusing to let him take the bus for something this important. They'd made the 4-hour drive in Carlos's beat-up Honda, windows down, music loud, both of them pretending the goodbye waiting at the end wasn't going to hurt. "This is it, man," Carlos said as they pulled up to the freshman dormitory. "Your actual fresh start." Ethan looked at the building, at the students and parents unloading cars, at the banners welcoming the new class. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time.
Hope.
They unloaded his bags in silence, the weight of the moment making words feel insufficient. Finally, standing in the parking lot, Carlos pulled him into a hug. "Don't forget where you came from," Carlos said. "But don't let it define you either. You're more than what they tried to make you." Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. "And hey," Carlos added, stepping back with a grin. "When you're rich and famous, remember who taught you how to make proper ramen." Ethan laughed, the sound cracking something open inside him. "I'll dedicate my first $1,000,000 to you." "Damn right you will." They said goodbye 3 more times before Carlos actually got in his car and drove away, and Ethan stood in the parking lot watching until the Honda disappeared around a corner. Then he picked up his bags and walked into his future. His roommate was a kid from Connecticut named Jeremy who'd brought enough stuff to furnish 3 rooms. He took one look at Ethan's single duffel bag and backpack and had the decency to look embarrassed about his 4 suitcases and mini fridge. "Travel light?" Jeremy asked. "Something like that," Ethan said. They settled into an easy coexistence. Jeremy was studying business, came from money but wasn't obnoxious about it, and had a girlfriend back home he video called every night at 9. He asked Ethan polite questions about his family that Ethan deflected with practiced ease, and after a few attempts, Jeremy stopped asking. The campus was enormous, overwhelming, beautiful. Buildings that looked like castles, libraries with more books than Ethan could read in a lifetime, lecture halls that seated 300 students. Everything was bigger, more intense, more alive than anything he'd experienced. And everywhere, there were people who didn't know his story, who didn't see him as the kid who got kicked out, the kid who slept in a storage room, the kid whose family didn't want him. They just saw Ethan, a freshman, a clean slate. He could be anyone here, anything. So, he chose to be exceptional. Before we go on, quick question. Are you subscribed? If not, go ahead and fix that for me. I promise, I'll keep the stories coming. Don't leave me hanging, love. His classes were brutal, in the best way. Introduction to programming felt like learning a new language, one where precision mattered, and there was always a right answer, if you looked hard enough. Data structures made his brain hurt in ways that felt productive. Calculus 2 was taught by a professor who spoke in metaphors and expected you to keep up. Ethan loved all of it. He studied in the library until they kicked him out at midnight. He formed study groups with other students who took the work seriously. He went to office hours and asked questions until the concepts clicked into place. He treated every assignment like it mattered because to him it did. This education was his. Paid for by his grades, his essays, his determination. No one could take it away. No one could hold it over his head. For the first time in his life, success was something he controlled completely. His professors noticed. Dr. Reeves, who taught his programming course, stopped him after class one October afternoon.
"Your code is clean," she said.
"Elegant even. Where'd you learn to think like this?" "I taught myself," Ethan said. "Started in high school." Self-taught programmers either develop terrible habits or exceptional ones, Dr. Reeves said. "You're the latter. Have you thought about research opportunities?" Ethan hadn't. He'd been so focused on surviving each semester, on maintaining his scholarship, that he hadn't looked beyond the immediate. "There's a lab I run," Dr. Reeves continued. "We work on machine learning applications for healthcare. I could use someone with your aptitude. It's paid, and it looks excellent on grad school applications." Grad school hadn't been on Ethan's radar either, but the way Dr. Reeves said it made it sound possible. Achievable. "I'd be interested," Ethan said.
"Good.
Come by my office tomorrow. We'll talk details." The research position changed everything. Suddenly, Ethan wasn't just a student. He was a researcher, working on real problems, contributing to papers that would be published in actual journals. He learned about neural networks and training data, and the ethics of AI in medicine. He worked alongside graduate students who treated him as a peer rather than an undergrad. And he got paid. Not much, but enough to start building savings beyond basic survival. By the end of his freshman year, Ethan had a 3.9 GPA, a position in one of the most prestigious research labs on campus, and letters of recommendation from professors who believed in his potential. He also had something else. A vision of who he wanted to become. Not just successful, not just wealthy, but someone who built things that mattered. Someone who solved problems that seemed impossible. Someone whose value was measured by what he created, not by what family he came from. Sophomore year, he added a minor in business. If he was going to build something, he needed to understand how businesses worked, how to turn ideas into companies, how to manage people and resources and growth. His schedule became punishing. Classes all morning, research in the afternoon, business club meetings in the evening, studying late into the night. Jeremy worried about him burning out, but Ethan had learned something important during those months of sleeping in a storage room. He knew how to endure. He knew how to push through exhaustion and keep going. And more importantly, he knew that struggling towards something was infinitely better than struggling against nothing. He met people, made friends, went to parties occasionally, though he never quite learned to relax the way other students did. There was always a part of him that stayed vigilant, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for success to be revealed as temporary.
But it didn't drop.
It didn't disappear. It just kept building. Junior year, he started his first company. It was small, barely a company really. Just him and two other students, building an app that used AI to help people manage chronic health conditions. They worked out of a tiny office space the university provided for student entrepreneurs, surviving on ramen and energy drinks and the absolute certainty that they were onto something. The app was called MediTrack. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was useful. It helped people remember medications, track symptoms, and share data with their doctors in a clean, intuitive interface. They launched it in the spring, expecting maybe a few hundred downloads. They got 10,000 in the first month. By summer, they had 50,000 users and a healthcare startup accelerator reaching out about funding. Ethan stood in front of a panel of investors, 20 years old, explaining his vision for accessible healthcare technology. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't tremble. He presented like someone who'd been doing this for decades, not someone who'd spent his senior year of high school sleeping in a bus station. The accelerator gave them $100,000 in seed funding. Ethan's share was $35,000. More money than he'd ever imagined having. Enough to prove that everything he'd survived had been worth it. He called Rita first. She cried on the phone, which made him cry, which made them both laugh at themselves.
"I knew you'd make it," Rita said.
"From that first night you showed up looking like a ghost. I knew you had something special in you." "You saved my life," Ethan said. "No, baby. I just gave you a place to sleep. You saved your own life." He sent Carlos a check for $5,000 with a note that said, "For teaching me about patience and proper ramen." Carlos called him immediately. "Are you insane? I can't take this." "Too late," Ethan said. "It's already deposited if you cashed it. Besides, you earned it. You kept me sane when I had no reason to be." Carlos was quiet for a moment. "You really made it, didn't you?" "We're getting there," Ethan said. Senior year felt like vindication. MediTrack grew. They hired actual employees, moved into a real office, started talking to hospitals and clinics about partnerships. Ethan balanced classes with CEO responsibilities, somehow managing to maintain his grades while building a company. Articles started appearing in tech blogs. Student entrepreneur builds healthcare app that actually helps people. How one developer is democratizing medical management. The future of healthcare might be created in a dorm room. Ethan did interviews, carefully controlling his narrative. He talked about his passion for accessible technology, his research background, his vision for the future. He never mentioned Victoria or Preston or the year he spent homeless. That pain was his.
Private.
Not a story for public consumption. But sometimes, late at night when he was alone in his apartment, the one he could finally afford, with furniture he'd actually bought instead of salvaged, he'd think about them. He wondered if they'd seen the articles. If his father had Googled his name and found success instead of failure. If Victoria had realized that kicking him out hadn't broken him, it had freed him. Dr. Reeves submitted his name for the Goldwater Scholarship, one of the most prestigious undergraduate awards in STEM fields. Ethan won. His business professors nominated him for the university's Entrepreneur of the Year award. He won that too. At graduation, he walked across the stage again, this time to thunderous applause, this time as valedictorian, this time with job offers from major tech companies and investors wanting to fund his next venture. Rita and Carlos were in the audience. Mrs. Park, too, having driven 4 hours to see the kid she'd helped save finish what he started. His father wasn't there. Neither was Victoria or Preston. Ethan didn't notice their absence. He was too busy celebrating with the family he'd chosen. After graduation, Ethan made a decision. He turned down all the job offers. Every single one, including the one from a major tech company that would have paid him $200,000 a year. Instead, he doubled down on Meditrack. They raised a series of funding round, $3 million from venture capitalists who believed in his vision. Ethan's share of the company was now worth over $1 million on paper, but he didn't touch it. He reinvested everything, hiring the best people, building the best product, focused entirely on growth. The company exploded. Within 2 years, Meditrack had 5 million users. Within 3, they were partnering with major hospital systems. Within 4, they were valued at $50 million. And Ethan owned 40% of it. He was 26 years old and worth $20 million. But he still lived modestly. A nice apartment, nothing extravagant. A reliable car, not a luxury one. Good food, but not excessive. He'd learned during those months of counting quarters that money was security, not identity. He donated anonymously to the transitional housing facility where he'd lived. He funded scholarships for homeless students. He made sure Rita got a bonus every year, even though she'd long since retired. And he built companies, technologies, solutions to problems he saw in the world. By 30, his net worth had crossed $100 million. By 32, he'd been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and Business Insider. By 33, he was one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of his generation, known for his innovative approach to healthcare technology and his quiet, methodical leadership style. And through it all, he never forgot the kid who'd slept in a bus station with $73 and a duffel bag. That kid had saved him, had refused to break, had chosen dignity over comfort. Ethan Malone owed him everything. The message came through LinkedIn of all places. Ethan was in his office, reviewing quarterly reports, when the notification pinged. He almost ignored it, the way he ignored most unsolicited messages from people trying to network or pitch ideas. But the name caught his eye. Preston Thatcher. He hadn't heard that name in over 15 years. Hadn't allowed himself to think about his stepbrother, about that smug smile and entitled laugh. Preston belonged to a chapter of his life that Ethan had carefully sealed shut. Curiosity won out over caution. He clicked on the profile. The photo showed a man in his early 30s, still recognizable but softer around the edges. The confidence that had once radiated from teenage Preston looked forced now, performative. His bio listed him as marketing consultant at various companies, though none of the names were familiar, and the dates suggested he'd moved around frequently. Ethan scrolled through Preston's experience. Started at his father's company right after college, lasted 2 years before moving to a startup that had since folded. Then another company, another short stint. Then several months of unemployment before the current consulting gig. The trajectory was clear. Downward. Ethan closed the profile without responding to the connection request. He told himself he didn't care. That Preston's struggles weren't his concern, weren't even satisfying. He'd moved so far beyond that world that their lives might as well exist in different universes. But that night, he found himself searching for more information. Robert Malone had retired 5 years ago, according to his company's press releases. The business he'd built had been sold to a larger firm, and Robert had settled into what the announcement called a well-deserved retirement. Victoria's name appeared only in society pages. Charity galas, country club events, the kind of performative philanthropy that was more about being seen than actually helping. She looked the same, just older. Still polished, still perfect, still radiating that ice-cold control. And Preston, well. Preston's digital footprint told a story of someone desperately trying to project success while drowning in mediocrity. Ethan closed his laptop and poured himself a whiskey. He sat in his apartment, the city lights stretching out below him, and felt nothing.
No satisfaction, no vindication.
Just a hollow sort of distance. 3 months later, his assistant intercepted a call. Someone named Robert Malone called, Jennifer said, standing in his office doorway with her tablet. Said he was your father. Wanted to know if you'd take a meeting. Ethan looked up from his computer. What did you tell him? That you were unavailable and I'd pass along the message. She paused. Should I have done something different? No, Ethan said. That was perfect. If he calls again, same response. Jennifer nodded and left, but Ethan couldn't focus on his work anymore. His father was reaching out. After 15 years of silence. After abandoning him. After choosing Victoria. After letting his son become homeless rather than standing up to his wife. Now he wanted a meeting. Ethan wondered what had changed. What had finally motivated Robert to pick up the phone after a decade and a half of nothing?
He didn't call back.
The articles started appearing 6 months later. Small pieces at first, buried in local business news. Malone Industries faces cash flow issues. Former CEO's company struggles after sale. Then bigger publications picked it up. When corporate legacy meets modern reality, the fall of a regional giant. Ethan read them with clinical detachment. Apparently, the company Robert had sold hadn't transitioned well. The buyers had stripped it for parts, laid off most of the workforce, shuttered the local offices. The retirement package Robert had negotiated was tied to company performance metrics that were now tanking. His father's comfortable retirement was evaporating. And Preston, it seemed, had been one of those laid-off employees. Ethan should have felt something.
Satisfaction, maybe.
Justice. The people who'd kicked him out were finally facing consequences. Instead, he felt tired. You all right, boss? Jennifer asked one afternoon, finding him staring out his office window instead of working. Just thinking about how life works, Ethan said. That's ominously philosophical for a Wednesday. Ethan smiled slightly. Do you believe in karma? Jennifer considered this. I believe people usually get what's coming to them, one way or another.
Why?
Someone from your past resurfacing? Something like that. Jennifer studied him for a moment. Whatever it is, remember, you don't owe them anything. Your past doesn't get to collect on your present. Wise words, Ethan said. I'm not just a pretty face, Jennifer said. Now stop brooding and sign these contracts. We've got an empire to run. Hey, while you're here with me, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you as part of the family. Go on, I'll wait. It helps more than you know. The emails started arriving through his company's general contact form. They were short, formal, clearly crafted to sound professional rather than personal. Inquiries about potential consulting work, investment opportunities, partnerships that might benefit both parties. All of them from Preston. Ethan deleted them without responding. Then a letter arrived at his office. Physical mail, expensive stationery, his father's handwriting on the envelope. Jennifer brought it to him with raised eyebrows. Old school, she said. Must be important. Ethan held the envelope for a long time before opening it. Dear Ethan, I know I have no right to contact you after all these years. I know I failed you as a father when you needed me most. There are no excuses for my behavior, no justifications that would make what happened acceptable. But I'm asking, humbly, if you would be willing to meet with me. Just once. Just to talk. Things have changed significantly since you left. Victoria and I divorced 3 years ago. Preston is struggling in ways I never anticipated. And I'm facing the consequences of choices I made long ago. I'm not asking for money or favors. I'm just asking for a chance to see the man you've become and to tell you how sorry I am for not being there when you needed me. Your father, Robert. Ethan read the letter 3 times. Divorced. That was interesting. Victoria had finally found something she couldn't control or manipulate away. Or maybe Robert had finally grown a spine. Either way, the perfect family she'd orchestrated had fractured. He put the letter in his desk drawer and didn't respond. But he did start paying attention to information about them again. Victoria, according to public records, had gotten the house in the divorce. Robert had moved to a modest condo downtown. Preston was living with him, based on the address listed on his consulting company's registration. 33 years old, and living with his father. The golden boy had tarnished spectacularly. Ethan could have left it there. Could have let them fade back into irrelevance, let karma run its course without his involvement. But then his private investigator, whom he'd hired more out of curiosity than malice, delivered a report that changed everything. Preston Thatcher is currently facing charges of embezzlement, the report stated. Allegedly stole funds from his last employer before the company folded. Case is ongoing, but he's looking at possible jail time if convicted. Unable to afford adequate legal representation. Public defender assigned. Robert Malone is in debt approximately $400,000 after divorce settlement and failed investments. Pension from company sale has been reduced to minimal payments due to corporate bankruptcy. Currently working part-time as a consultant, but age and reputation make finding steady work difficult. Victoria Thatcher living comfortably on divorce settlement. No financial struggles detected. Has cut off contact with son Preston after his legal troubles became public. Reputation management appears to be her priority. Ethan sat in his office, reading the report over and over. Preston was facing jail time. His father was drowning in debt. And Victoria had abandoned them both the moment they became liabilities. The perfect family had imploded, and the fallout was devastating. And they had nowhere to turn. No resources, no connections powerful enough to save them, no way out that didn't require help from someone with means. Someone like Ethan. He thought about the 17-year-old kid who'd been kicked out with a duffel bag and $73. He thought about sleeping in bus stations and bleeding through work gloves. He thought about his father's silence and Preston's cruelty and Victoria's cold calculations. He thought about all the years he'd spent building himself into someone who didn't need them, who couldn't be hurt by them. And now they needed him. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Ethan picked up his phone and called his assistant.
Jennifer, he said.
I need you to schedule a meeting. 2 people, 1 time slot.
Make it next week.
Sure, she said. Who am I reaching out to? Robert and Preston Malone, Ethan said. Tell them I'm finally ready to talk. The call came at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. Ethan was in his home office, reviewing code for a new feature MediTrack was rolling out, when his personal phone rang. He had given his father the number through Jennifer along with the meeting date.
3 days from now.
Wednesday at 2 p.m. Apparently, 3 days was too long to wait. Ethan considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity, that old companion, made him answer. Hello, Ethan? His father's voice cracked on the name. God, it's really you. I wasn't sure you'd actually answer. You called my personal number, Ethan said. I assume it's important.
Yes.
Robert cleared his throat. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm grateful for it. Ethan said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I wanted to call sooner, Robert continued. As soon as I heard about your success, I wanted to reach out.
But I didn't know what to say.
How do you apologize for 15 years? How do you explain that you've thought about your son every day, but never had the courage to actually do anything about it? You could start with the truth, Ethan said. Why are you calling now? Why not last year or 5 years ago, or when I first made the news? Robert exhaled slowly. Because I'm desperate. Because Preston is in trouble, real trouble, and I don't know how to save him. Because I've lost everything I built, and I'm watching my son make the same mistakes I made, and I can't fix it on my own. There it was. The truth, stripped of pretense. So you need something, Ethan said. Yes, Robert admitted. But I just want to see you, to tell you I'm sorry. Even if you can't help, even if you send us away, I need you to know that abandoning you was the biggest mistake of my life. Ethan closed his laptop. He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city lights, and felt something twist in his chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. His father was broken. Truly, completely broken. Wednesday, Ethan said. 2 p.m. My office. Don't be late. We won't, Robert said quickly. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you so much. Ethan hung up before his father could say anything else. He sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what was coming. By the way, if you're listening and feeling this story already, you might as well subscribe. Don't be shy, join us. We're in this together now. Wednesday arrived with perfect weather, as if the universe was mocking the gravity of the meeting. Ethan dressed carefully that morning. A suit, tailored and expensive, but not ostentatious. He wanted to look successful, without looking like he was trying to intimidate. Professional, composed, in control. He wanted them to see exactly what they'd thrown away. Jennifer had set up the meeting in his personal office rather than a conference room. More intimate, less corporate. Ethan had arranged 3 chairs in front of his desk, positioning them so Robert and Preston would be looking up at him slightly. Small power plays, but effective ones. They arrived at 1:55 p.m. Jennifer escorted them to his office, and Ethan watched them enter through the glass wall, studying them before they saw him. Robert looked old. Not just older, but worn down, like life had been systematically sanding away his edges. His suit was outdated, his posture defeated. He walked like a man carrying invisible weight. Preston looked worse. The confidence was gone entirely, replaced by barely concealed panic. His suit was cheap, ill-fitting. His hair was thinning. His hands shook slightly as he clutched a folder to his chest like a shield. This was the golden boy who'd made Ethan's teenage years a living hell. This frightened, diminished man. Ethan felt no satisfaction in it. Just a strange, hollow pity. He stood as they entered. Ethan, Robert said, his voice thick. You look incredible.
Thank you, Ethan said. Please sit.
They sat. Preston wouldn't meet his eyes. Robert couldn't stop staring, like he was trying to reconcile his memory of a hurt 17-year-old with the successful executive in front of him. Thank you for seeing us, Robert began. I know this must be difficult. It's a meeting, Ethan said neutrally. Let's keep the emotional preamble to a minimum. You said you needed to talk. So talk. Robert glanced at Preston, who remained silent, staring at the floor. Preston is in legal trouble, Robert finally said. He made some bad decisions at his last job. He was trying to save the company, trying to keep people employed, and he crossed some lines. Moved money without proper authorization. The company folded anyway, and now they're blaming him for the losses. Embezzlement, Ethan said flatly. The charges are embezzlement and fraud. Robert flinched. It sounds worse than it was.
Does it?
Ethan looked at Preston. Would you like to explain your side? Preston finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. I was trying to help, he said quietly. The company was dying. People were going to lose their jobs. I thought if I could just move some funds around, buy us some time, I could fix it. By stealing? By borrowing, Preston said. I was going to pay it back. But you didn't, Ethan said. The company collapsed, the money disappeared, and now you're facing charges. How much? $200,000, Preston whispered. Ethan let out a low whistle. That's not borrowing. That's theft. I know, Preston said, and his voice broke. I know, okay? I screwed up. I've screwed up everything. My career, my reputation, my future. If I'm convicted, I'm looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. The room fell silent. What do you want from me? Ethan asked. Robert leaned forward. Legal help. A good attorney could maybe get the charges reduced, could argue that Preston's intent wasn't criminal. But those attorneys cost money we don't have. I've already spent everything I had left just trying to keep him out of jail while the case is pending. How much? For a real defense? Robert's voice was hollow. 300,000. Maybe more. Ethan absorbed this. $300,000. A fortune to them. Pocket change to him. And you think I should pay for this, Ethan said. Because we're family. Not because we're family, Robert said quickly. Because you're a good person. Because despite everything we did to you, you turned out to be better than us. Because you have the power to help, and I'm hoping you'll choose mercy over justice. Mercy, Ethan repeated. That's an interesting word choice. He stood and walked to the window, his back to them, looking out at the city. Do you know what I remember most from that last night? Ethan asked. Not the yelling. Not even being kicked out. I remember standing in the hallway, listening to you have dinner without me, and realizing that I was completely alone. That the only family I had left had chosen sides, and I wasn't on the winning team. Ethan, Robert started. I remember sleeping in a bus station that first night. Ethan continued, his voice steady. I remember rationing $67 like it was my last line of defense against the world. I remember collapsing at school from malnutrition. In a probationary capacity, Ethan continued. Entry-level position. Minimal salary. You'll report to one of my junior managers, and you'll do whatever work is assigned to you without complaint. You'll prove that you can be reliable, honest, and competent. If you succeed, there might be room for advancement. If you fail, you're done. Not just with my company, but with any help from me ever again. Preston nodded quickly. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Second, Ethan looked at his father. Dad, you're drowning in debt. I'm going to pay it off. All of it. You'll be clear, free to actually retire comfortably. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Son, I don't know what to say.
Don't thank me yet, Ethan said.
Because in exchange, you're going to do something for me. Something that should have happened 15 years ago. Anything, Robert repeated. You're going to sit down and write me a letter, Ethan said. A real one. Explaining exactly what happened, why you made the choices you made, and what you should have done differently. You're going to be honest, brutal, unflinching. And then you're going to read it to me out loud, so we both have to sit with the truth of it. Robert nodded, tears streaming down his face. I can do that. And third, Ethan said, his voice softening slightly, once this is all over, once Preston's legal issues are resolved and you've paid off your debt and we've had our conversation, we're going to try something new. We're going to try being a family. A real one. Built on honesty and respect rather than obligation and guilt. You'd give us that chance? Robert whispered. I'm not doing it for you, Ethan said. I'm doing it because I've spent 15 years building a life, and the only thing missing from it is closure. This, right here, this is how I get it. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Robert stood, walked around the desk, and pulled Ethan into a hug. Ethan stood stiffly for a moment, then slowly, carefully, hugged back. I'm sorry, Robert sobbed against his shoulder.
I'm so sorry.
I know, Ethan said quietly. I know you are. When they finally separated, Preston was crying too, his face in his hands. Thank you, Preston managed. You didn't have to do this. No, Ethan said. I didn't. But I'm choosing to anyway. That's the difference between us. I choose mercy.
You demanded it.
He pressed a button on his phone, and Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Jennifer, Ethan said, these are my father and stepbrother. Please get their information and start the paperwork for what we discussed. Of course, Jennifer said, professional as always. Gentlemen, if you'll follow me. Robert and Preston stood, moving toward the door in a daze. At the threshold, Robert turned back. Your mother would be proud of you, he said. Ethan smiled, small and sad. I hope so, he said. She's the reason I survived long enough to become this person. They left, and Ethan was alone in his office again. He sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. His phone buzzed. A text from Carlos. How'd it go? Ethan typed back. I gave them what they needed. Not sure how I feel about it yet. Carlos. That's what good people do. They help even when it hurts.
Proud of you, man.
Ethan set the phone down and looked out at the city. He'd won. Completely, undeniably. He'd become everything they'd never expected, and now they were in his debt, dependent on his generosity for their futures. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like the end of something that should have ended a long time ago. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. Robert had taken his time, which Ethan appreciated. This wasn't something that should be rushed, thrown together to check a box. This needed to be real, considered, honest in a way his father had never been forced to be. It was 37 pages long. Ethan sat in his apartment on a Saturday morning, coffee growing cold beside him, and read every word. His father had been thorough. Brutally, painfully thorough. The letter started with his mother's death, with Robert's overwhelming grief and complete inability to cope with single parenthood. It described meeting Victoria at a work conference, how her confidence and control had felt like a life raft when he was drowning. How he'd convinced himself that remarrying quickly was good for Ethan, that a two-parent household was better than a grieving widower trying to hold everything together. Then it detailed the slow erosion of their relationship. Small moments at first. Victoria suggesting Ethan needed more discipline. Preston complaining about having to share attention. Robert choosing not to make waves, telling himself he was keeping the peace, that things would settle. But they never settled. They just got worse. Robert wrote about the first time he'd noticed Preston being cruel to Ethan and had said nothing. About Victoria's subtle campaigns to establish her son as the priority child. About every dinner where Ethan sat silent and Robert pretended not to notice. About the allowance being cut. About the demands for an apology. About the final confrontation where Victoria had issued her ultimatum. And Robert had chosen her. He'd chosen comfort over courage, his new wife over his first son, peace over principle. The letter didn't make excuses. It didn't justify. It simply laid out the truth in all its ugly, cowardly detail. Ethan read the last page 3 times. I told myself I was doing what was best for everyone, Robert had written. But the truth is, I was doing what was easiest for me. Losing your mother broke something in me, and instead of healing it, I tried to cover it up with a new family, a new life, a new story where I wasn't the grieving widower struggling to raise a son alone. But you deserved better. You deserved a father who fought for you, who protected you, who chose you every single time. And I failed you in every way that mattered. I can't undo the past 15 years. I can't give you back your teenage years or erase the trauma of being homeless. I can't make myself into the father I should have been. But I can tell you the truth. Abandoning you was the worst thing I ever did. Not because of where you ended up, though I'm endlessly grateful you survived and thrived, but because I broke a promise to your mother, to you, and to myself. I chose the easier path, and it cost me my son. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance you're giving me. But I want you to know that every success you've achieved, every obstacle you've overcome, you did it without me. And that's both my greatest shame and my greatest pride. You became an incredible man despite having a coward for a father. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. But I'm sorry anyway. Ethan set the letter down and stared out his window for a long time. Jennifer had set up the reading for Monday afternoon. 3 p.m., back in his office. Both Robert and Preston would be there, as required. Preston's legal situation had progressed quickly once Ethan's attorneys got involved. The charges had been reduced to misdemeanor fraud with a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and community service. No jail time. His record would be damaged, but his life wouldn't be destroyed. And he'd started working at Meditrack the previous week, assigned to the customer service department. Early reports said he was punctual, polite, and trying hard to prove himself. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. Sunday night, Ethan called Carlos. Big day tomorrow, Carlos said. You ready? I don't know, Ethan admitted. I thought I'd feel more triumphant about all this. Like, I'd won some grand victory. But mostly I just feel tired. That's because revenge isn't actually satisfying, Carlos said. It's just closure wearing a mask. What you're doing, the real thing, that's harder. That's choosing to actually heal instead of just making them hurt. When'd you get so wise? Years of therapy and hindsight, my friend. Carlos paused. You know you don't have to forgive them, right? You can help them and still keep your distance. Closure doesn't require reconciliation.
I know, Ethan said.
But I think I want to try. Not for them.
For me.
Because I'm tired of carrying this weight. Then tomorrow's going to be hard, Carlos said. But necessary. And you'll get through it the same way you got through everything else.
How's that?
By being stronger than you have any right to be. Monday afternoon arrived too quickly. Robert and Preston entered Ethan's office at precisely 3 p.m. Robert carried the letter like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Preston looked nervous, fidgeting with his watch. Jennifer brought in 3 bottles of water, set them on the conference table, and closed the door silently behind her. Ethan gestured to the chairs. Same arrangement as before. Him behind the desk, them in front. A reminder of who held the power here.
Thank you for coming, Ethan said.
Dad, you brought the letter? Robert nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he held it up. Before we begin, quick question. Are you subscribed?
If not, go ahead and fix that for me.
These are the moments that matter, the ones that change everything. Don't miss what comes next. Then let's get started, Ethan said. The deal was that you'd read it out loud. All of it. No summarizing, no skipping parts. I want to hear every word in your voice. Robert swallowed hard. All of it? All of it. Robert opened the letter. His voice shook on the first sentence, steadied slightly by the second, then cracked again when he got to the part about Ethan's mother making him promise to always protect their son. Ethan listened without interrupting. He watched his father's face as Robert forced himself to read his own failures aloud, to speak the truth he'd avoided for 15 years. Preston listened too, his expression shifting from uncomfortable to shocked to quietly devastated as the letter revealed not just Robert's failures as a father, but the full scope of how Victoria had manipulated the household, how Preston himself had been weaponized against Ethan. When Robert reached the part about the final confrontation, about Victoria's ultimatum, and his choice to let his son walk out into homelessness, his voice broke completely. I can't, Robert sobbed. I can't read this. I can't face what I did. Yes, you can, Ethan said quietly. This is what I'm asking from you. Not money, not apologize.
Truth.
Spoken out loud, so we both have to hear it. Robert wiped his eyes and continued, his voice raw. It took 45 minutes to read the entire letter. By the end, Robert was crying openly. Preston was pale and shaken, and Ethan felt something old and painful begin to crack open inside his chest. When Robert finished the last sentence, he set the letter down carefully on the desk. The office was silent except for Robert's ragged breathing. Thank you, Ethan said finally. For being honest. For not trying to soften it or make yourself look better. Robert nodded, unable to speak. Ethan stood and walked around the desk. He pulled a chair over and sat directly across from his father, close enough that their knees almost touched. Do you know what the worst part was? Ethan asked. Not the homelessness. Not the hunger or the exhaustion. The worst part was believing that I wasn't worth fighting for. That my own father looked at me and Victoria and chose her comfort over my safety.
I'm sorry, Robert whispered.
I know you are, Ethan said. And I appreciate the apology. But sorry doesn't fix it. Sorry doesn't give me back those years. So here's what I need you to understand. I'm giving you a second chance not because you've earned it, but because I'm choosing not to let your failures define the rest of my life. Robert looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. But that second chance comes with boundaries, Ethan continued. We rebuild our relationship slowly on my terms. You don't get to make demands or expectations. You don't get to show up and expect immediate forgiveness just because you've admitted you were wrong. You earn back trust over time, through consistent actions, not grand gestures. I understand, Robert said. Whatever you need. However long it takes. Good, Ethan said. He turned to Preston. Your turn. Preston stiffened. My turn for what? To tell me the truth about why you treated me the way you did. Preston looked at his father, then back at Ethan. I already apologized. You apologized for the consequences, Ethan said. But I want to understand the motivation. Why me? What did I do to deserve your cruelty? Preston was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. You had something I wanted. Money? Ethan asked.
Because you had plenty of that.
Preston shook his head. Your dad's attention. He looked at Robert. Before my mom married your dad, it was just us. Me and her. She made me feel like I was the center of the universe, like everything she did was for me. Then we moved into your house and suddenly there was you. And you'd had him first. You had all these memories and inside jokes, and this whole history I wasn't part of. So you tried to erase me, Ethan said. I tried to prove I was better, Preston said. That I deserved his attention more. Every time I made fun of you, every time I made you look small, it was because I needed to feel bigger. Because I was insecure and jealous, and my mom kept telling me I was the important one, that I was her perfect boy, and I believed her. He paused, his hands twisting together. But the truth is, I was never enough for her, Preston continued. The second I wasn't perfect, the second I made mistakes, she threw me away. Just like she probably would have thrown me away eventually anyway, because people like her don't actually love anyone. They just collect accessories. And I was useful until I wasn't. His voice cracked. You were right to hate me. I was a terrible person. I am a terrible person. And I'm trying to figure out how to be better, but I don't even know where to start. Ethan studied his stepbrother. Saw the brokenness there, the genuine remorse mixed with self-loathing. You start by doing the work, Ethan said. By showing up every day to that entry-level job, and doing it well. By being honest when you make mistakes instead of covering them up. By treating people with respect even when it doesn't benefit you. You become better by making better choices, consistently over time. Preston nodded. I can do that. I want to do that. Then do it, Ethan said. Not for me. Not to earn my forgiveness. But because you deserve to be someone you're not ashamed of. The three of them sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan stood. Here's how this is going to work going forward, he said. Once a month, we have dinner. Just the three of us. No pressure. No expectations. We talk, we're honest, we slowly figure out what a functional relationship looks like. Family dinners, Robert said, smiling through tears. With boundaries and therapy, Ethan added. I've already arranged for both of you to start seeing counselors. It's non-negotiable. You both have work to do beyond just apologizing to me. We'll do it, Preston said immediately. Whatever it takes. Good, Ethan said. Then I think we're done here. Robert stood, hesitated, then moved forward to hug Ethan again. This time, Ethan hugged back without stiffness, allowing himself to feel the complicated mess of emotions that came with forgiving someone who'd hurt you so deeply. When they separated, Preston stood awkwardly to the side. Ethan extended his hand. Preston shook it, formal and careful. Thank you, Preston said. For the second chance. Don't waste it, Ethan replied. After they left, Ethan sat alone in his office again, watching the sun set over the city. His phone buzzed. A text from Rita. Heard you had a big meeting today. You okay? Ethan smiled and typed back. Yeah. I think I actually am. Another text, this one from Mrs. Park. Whatever happened today, I hope you found peace. Getting there, Ethan replied. He stood and gathered his things. As he was leaving, he paused by the framed photo on his desk. His mother, young and smiling, holding a toddler version of him at the beach. I kept my promise, Mom, he said quietly. I survived. And I didn't let them make me cruel. He turned off the lights and went home. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel, surrounded by 500 people who'd paid $1,000 a plate to attend the Meditrack Foundation Gala. It had been his idea to start the foundation, a nonprofit arm of his company dedicated to providing free healthcare management technology to underserved communities. They'd launched 3 months ago, and tonight was their first major fundraiser. The room glittered with success. Tech executives, venture capitalists, healthcare administrators, philanthropists. All of them there because Ethan Malone had built something that mattered, and they wanted to be part of it. Jennifer appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. You're on in 5 minutes, she said. Speech is loaded on the teleprompter, but I know you're going to ignore it and speak from the heart anyway. You know me too well, Ethan said. It's literally my job, she replied. Also, your family is seated at table 7. They arrived about 20 minutes ago. Ethan nodded. He'd invited them, though he hadn't been sure they'd come. The past 6 months had been a slow, careful process of rebuilding. Monthly dinners that were awkward at first, then gradually easier. Therapy sessions where they all had to confront uncomfortable truths. Small moments of connection that felt fragile, but genuine. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect, but it was something. How's Preston doing? Ethan asked.
At the job, I mean,
Jennifer consulted her tablet. His supervisor says he's exceeded expectations. Promoted to team lead last month. Customers love him, apparently. He's got this thing where he really listens to their problems instead of just trying to close tickets.
good, Ethan said.
That's good. Your dad sent flowers for your office, by the way, Jennifer continued, with a note that just says, proud of you.
Very dad-like.
Ethan smiled.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
The lights dimmed slightly, and a coordinator waved at him from across the room.
Time.
Ethan made his way to the stage, weaving through tables of expensive gowns and tailored suits. He climbed the steps, stood behind the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces. And there, at table 7, were Robert and Preston. His father in a rented tux that was slightly too big. Preston in a suit that Ethan recognized as one he'd bought him for work. Both of them looking proud and nervous and impossibly grateful. Good evening, Ethan began, and the room fell silent. Thank you all for being here tonight. For believing in the mission of the Meditrack Foundation and for supporting our work to make healthcare management accessible to everyone, regardless of their financial situation. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I didn't prepare a formal speech for tonight, he continued, because the story I want to tell you isn't about corporate success or technological innovation. It's about why this foundation exists. Why I believe so deeply that everyone deserves access to tools that can help them survive and thrive. The room was absolutely still. When I was 17 years old, Ethan said, I became homeless. He heard the collective intake of breath, saw heads turn toward each other in surprise. It wasn't because of addiction or mental illness or any of the stereotypes we often associate with homelessness. It was because my family, for complicated reasons that we're still working through, decided I didn't belong in their home anymore. So I left with a duffel bag, $73, and no plan for what came next. At table 7, Robert had his hand over his mouth. Preston was staring at the table. I slept in bus stations, Ethan continued. I worked overnight shifts at a grocery store and slept in a storage room. I collapsed at school from malnutrition. I learned what it felt like to be invisible, to be the problem everyone wanted to ignore. He looked directly at his father. But I also learned something else. I learned that survival is a skill you can develop. That dignity is something no one can take from you unless you give it away. That the people who write you off, who underestimate you, who decide you're not worth their time or energy, they're not the ones who get to define your future. The room erupted in applause. Ethan waited for it to die down. The Meditrack Foundation exists because I remember what it felt like to be powerless, he said. To need help and have nowhere to turn. To watch other people live comfortable lives while you're trying to figure out if you can afford to eat today. We've built technology that helps people manage chronic illnesses, coordinate care, access resources. And we're giving it away for free to anyone who needs it. More applause, louder this time. Because here's what I learned during those months of homelessness, Ethan said. The distance between success and failure is often just one person who decides to help. One teacher who stays late. One employer who takes a chance. One stranger who offers shelter when you have nowhere else to go. He thought of Rita, of Carlos, of Mrs. Park, of all the people who'd seen him drowning and thrown him a lifeline. So tonight, we're asking you to be that person for someone else, Ethan continued. Your donations will fund free app subscriptions for low-income families. They'll support research into accessible healthcare technology. They'll help us build systems that don't require wealth to access wellness. He paused, emotion catching in his throat. Before I finish, I want to say something personal. My father and my stepbrother are here tonight. The same people who 6 months ago I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. The same people who were part of the story I just told you. At table 7, Robert and Preston were both crying now. Revenge, Ethan said slowly, is something we think about a lot when we've been hurt. We imagine the moment when the people who wronged us finally understand what they did. Finally feel the weight of their choices. Finally beg for forgiveness. He looked out at the crowd. And 6 months ago, I got that moment. They came to me desperate, broken, needing help they couldn't get anywhere else. I had all the power. I could have destroyed them with a word, with a refusal, with the same cold indifference they'd shown me. The room was breathless. But here's what I realized about revenge, Ethan said. It's hollow. It's temporary satisfaction that leaves you just as empty as you were before. Real power, lasting power, comes from choosing something harder. Choosing growth over grudges. Choosing to help even when it would be easier to hurt. He smiled, small and genuine. So yes, they're here tonight. And yes, we're rebuilding a relationship that was shattered a long time ago. Not because they deserved it. Not because I've forgotten what happened. But because I decided that the best revenge isn't making them suffer. The best revenge is becoming someone so successful, so fulfilled, so completely at peace with who I am, that their opinion of me no longer matters. The room exploded in applause. People were standing, clapping, some wiping their eyes. At table 7, Robert and Preston were on their feet too, tears streaming down their faces, clapping harder than anyone. Ethan waited for the noise to die down. So thank you, he said, for being here tonight. Thank you for supporting this foundation. And thank you for believing that we can build a world where everyone has access to the tools they need to survive and thrive, regardless of their circumstances. He stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. As he walked off stage, Jennifer was waiting with a knowing smile. That was definitely not the speech we prepared, she said. No, Ethan agreed. But it was the right one. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and conversations. Donors pledging money, executives wanting to partner, people telling him how moved they were by his story. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the night. Robert and Preston approached him as the crowd was thinning. For a moment, they all just stood there, not quite sure what to say. That was, Robert started, then stopped, too emotional to continue. Brave, Preston finished. That was incredibly brave. To tell your story like that. To be vulnerable in front of all these people. It's not bravery if it's the truth, Ethan said. It's just honesty. Robert pulled him into a hug, tight and desperate. I'm so sorry, he whispered. For all of it. For every single moment. I know, Dad, Ethan said. I know you are. When they separated, Preston extended his hand for a shake, but Ethan pulled him into a hug instead. We're family, Ethan said quietly. Broken, complicated, still figuring it out. But family nonetheless. Preston nodded against his shoulder, unable to speak. After they left, Ethan found himself alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed. Multiple texts waiting. From Carlos. Watch the live stream. You did good, brother. Real good. From Rita. That's my boy. Your mama would be so proud. From Mrs. Park. I always knew you'd change the world. Thank you for proving me right. Ethan smiled, sliding the phone back into his pocket. He thought about the 17-year-old who'd walked out of his father's house with nothing, who'd been so angry, so hurt, so determined to survive just to prove them wrong. That kid would be amazed by this moment, by the success, the foundation, the reconciliation. But he'd also be relieved to know that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Because the real victory wasn't the money or the company or even making his family understand what they'd lost. The real victory was standing here, 33 years old, genuinely happy, surrounded by people who loved him, doing work that mattered, and feeling absolutely no need to prove anything to anyone. He'd won. Not by destroying them, but by building something so beautiful that their absence from his life had become irrelevant. And now, impossibly, they were here. Not as the family who'd hurt him, but as people trying to be better. Trying to earn a place in the life he'd built without them. It would never erase the past. He'd always carry the scars of those years. But scars were proof of survival. Proof that you'd been hurt and healed anyway. Ethan Malone had survived. He'd healed. And he'd done it by refusing to let their cruelty make him cruel in return. That was the revenge they'd never seen coming. Not fury or punishment, but grace so complete it left no room for their guilt to hide. Settle in, loves. We're almost done. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment.
Be part of this family.
We need you here. 2 years later. The coffee shop was busy for a Wednesday morning, full of students and freelancers and people stealing a moment of quiet before their day began. Ethan sat at a corner table, reading through a research proposal one of his graduate students had submitted. He taught one class a semester now at Northeastern, giving back to the institution that had given him so much. The bell above the door chimed, and Preston walked in. He looked different these days. More confident, more settled. He'd been promoted twice at Meditrack and was now managing the entire customer success division. He'd gotten his own apartment, started dating someone who actually seemed good for him, and by all accounts, was building a life he could be proud of. He spotted Ethan and made his way over, 2 coffees in hand. "Got you the usual," Preston said, setting down a cappuccino. "Thanks," Ethan said, gesturing to the seat across from him. They met for coffee every other week now. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about their complicated family history. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd hurt each other learning how to be brothers. "Dad wanted me to tell you, he finished his memoir," Preston said, pulling out his phone to show Ethan a photo of a thick manuscript. His therapist suggested writing it all down. Says he's thinking about getting it published.
How do you feel about that?
Ethan asked. Preston considered this. Terrified, he admitted. But also, I think it's important. His story, our story, it's messy and painful, but it's also about accountability and change. Maybe it helps someone else. Maybe, Ethan agreed. He still asks about you constantly, Preston said. Worries he's taking up too much of your time with the monthly dinners. I told him you wouldn't keep showing up if you didn't want to. I want to, Ethan said. It's not always easy, but I want to try. Preston smiled. You're a better person than I would be in your position. I'm just a person, Ethan said, trying to make better choices than the ones that were made for me. They sipped their coffee in silence for a moment. I got something for you, Preston said, pulling an envelope from his bag. Consider it a very late apology gift. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. Preston, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Preston said firmly. It's the money you would have had if Mom hadn't cut off your allowance. 17 years old, $200 a month until you turned 18. I did the math, added interest, added more, because honestly the whole thing was so much worse than just missing allowance. Ethan stared at the check. I know it doesn't fix anything, Preston continued, but it's symbolic. It's me saying that what we did to you had a cost, and I'm trying to pay back what I can. Ethan folded the check carefully and put it back in the envelope. Thank you, he said quietly. This means more than you know. What will you do with it? Donate it to the foundation, Ethan said. In your name. So other kids who get kicked out have resources we didn't know existed. Preston's eyes got wet. That's perfect. They finished their coffee, talking about smaller things. Preston's girlfriend, Ethan's latest project, their father's attempts to learn how to cook now that he lived alone. When they stood to leave, Preston hesitated. Can I ask you something?
He said. Sure.
Do you think you'll ever really forgive us? Like, completely?
Ethan thought about this.
Forgiveness isn't an event, he said finally. It's a process. Some days I'm further along than others. Some days I remember everything, and it hurts like it just happened. Other days I look at you and Dad, and I just see family. Complicated, imperfect, but trying. That's fair, Preston said. But I will tell you this, Ethan continued. I'm glad you're in my life now. I'm glad we're doing this. Because the alternative, staying angry forever, it would have poisoned me. And they don't get to poison me anymore. Preston nodded, understanding. They walked out of the coffee shop together, into the bright morning sun. Ethan's phone rang. Jennifer, calling about a meeting he needed to prep for. As he answered, Preston waved goodbye and headed in the opposite direction, toward the Meditrack office where he'd spend his day helping customers, doing work that mattered, slowly building a life worth living. Ethan watched him go and felt something settle in his chest.
Peace.
Not perfect, not complete, but real. The person who'd walked away all those years ago had made space for the life he deserved. And now, impossibly, that life included the people who'd hurt him, transformed into people who were trying to do better. That was the real revenge. Not their suffering, but their growth. Not their destruction, but their redemption. Because in the end, the best way to defeat people who tried to make you small is to become so large, so generous, so filled with grace, that there's room for everyone at the table. Even them. Especially them. Ethan Malone walked toward his car, toward his office, toward the life he'd built from nothing. And he walked without looking back. Because the past was finally, beautifully, just the past. And the future? The future was his. The end. Sometimes the person who walked away simply made space for the life you deserved all along. Thank you for being here, for listening to Ethan's story, for walking this journey with me. If this touched you, if you felt something real, I'd love for you to leave a comment below. Tell me what resonated. Tell me your story if you feel brave enough to share it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories matter because you're here to witness them. Because we're building something together, a community that believes in resilience, in second chances, in the power of choosing grace over grudges. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. And your best revenge is becoming someone they can never touch again.